The holy water was still dripping from my baby daughter Cordelia's forehead when my grandmother Beatrice stood up and screamed those 7 words that would destroy our family. "This baby is the devil's child." Her voice cracked through the sanctuary like a whip, and I watched in horror as 200 people turned to stare at us. My legs went numb. My husband Garrett's hand crushed mine as grandmother Beatrice pushed past my Aunt Delphine and marched toward the baptismal font, her finger pointing at my 6-month-old daughter like she was marking her for death. "She's brought evil into our family," grandmother Beatrice shouted, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I've seen the signs, the marks. This child cannot be baptized in God's house." Father Morrison stood frozen with the consecrated oil still in his hand, his mouth open but no words coming out. Behind us, I heard the rustle of clothing as church members crossed themselves, some pulling their own children closer, others already pulling out their phones to record what was happening. My mother-in-law, Nadine, gasped from the 3rd row. Someone dropped a hymnal, and the sound echoed like thunder. "Beatrice, please," my father Theodore called out, starting to rise from his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. "What are you doing?" But she wasn't listening to him. She never listened to anyone when she got like this, when her religious fervor took over and turned her into someone I didn't recognize. Except this time was different. This time she wasn't ranting about modest clothing or missed Sunday services. This time she was attacking my baby. "The child was born under a blood moon," she declared, pulling her worn Bible from her purse and holding it high above her head. "She draws darkness to her. Ravens circle their house. Crucifixes fall from walls when she enters a room. Last week, when they brought her to my apartment, my Bible burst into flames the moment she crossed the threshold." "Your Bible fell onto your space heater," I managed to say, my voice shaking as I instinctively pulled Cordelia closer to my chest. She was starting to fuss, sensing the tension, even though she couldn't understand the words. "You were confused, Grandma. The nurse said you'd taken too much of your anxiety medication that day. Don't you dare gaslight me, girl." She spun toward me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that went beyond religious zealotry. It was fear, raw, desperate fear. "I know what I've seen, I know what this child is, and I know who her real father is." The congregation gasped in unison. Garrett went rigid beside me, his jaw clenching as he stepped forward. "What exactly are you implying, Beatrice?" "I'm not implying anything," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the church. "I'm stating facts. I've done my research, Garrett. I know about your family's history, your grandfather in Louisiana, the things he practiced in those swamps, the bloodline you carry, the darkness you've passed to this innocent-looking child." That's when I noticed my 8-year-old son Finnegan moving through the chaos. He wasn't running or crying like some of the other children. He was walking with purpose, his small hand wrapped around something in his jacket pocket. His face had that same determined look he got when he was solving a particularly difficult math problem or building something complex with his Legos. He was heading straight for his great-grandmother, and nobody else seemed to notice him yet. "Great-grandma," Finnegan said, his young voice cutting through her rant with surprising clarity. The entire church fell silent, watching this small boy in his neat bow tie stand before the family matriarch who towered over him like an avenging angel. "Should I play your midnight conversations?" The Bible slipped from Grandmother Beatrice's hands and hit the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous anger, turned the color of old paper. "What are you talking about, child?" Finnegan pulled my phone from his pocket, holding it up so everyone could see. "The voice memos, great-grandma, the ones that automatically record when someone leaves messages at night. You've been leaving a lot of messages, haven't you? Not just for Mom, for other people, too. Like the one from Tuesday at 2:47 a.m. where you're talking to someone named Vincent about the payment and keeping the secret buried." "Finnegan, give me that phone right now," she demanded, but her voice had lost all its power. She reached for it with trembling hands, but my son stepped back, keeping the device just out of her reach. "Or the one from last month," he continued, his voice steady and clear, "where you're crying and saying you had to tell everyone Cordelia was evil. or they'd find out what you did. That you had to create a distraction before anyone noticed the missing money. The sanctuary erupted. People were standing, talking over each other, some calling for order while others demanded to hear the recording. Father Morrison was trying to restore calm, but his voice was lost in the chaos. My father had gone pale, staring at his mother like he'd never seen her before. My brother Donovan was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach us. And through it all, Cordelia had started to cry, her innocent wails mixing with the adult voices in a symphony of confusion. But I wasn't looking at any of them. I was looking at my grandmother, watching as decades of carefully constructed religious authority crumbled in real time. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and in her eyes I saw the truth she'd been hiding behind fire and brimstone for who knows how long. "Play it," I said to Finnegan, my voice carrying across the chaos with a mother's authority. "Play it now." That morning had started with such promise. I remember standing in our bedroom at 6 a.m., carefully removing Cordelia's christening gown from its protective bag while she slept peacefully in her crib. The dress was over 100 years old, passed down through Garrett's family, each tiny pearl sewn by his great-great-grandmother's hands. The lace was the color of aged cream, delicate as butterfly wings, and when I held it up to the morning light streaming through our window, I could see the faint outlines of all the babies who had worn it before. "She's going to be the most beautiful baby that church has ever seen," Garrett said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. He smelled like coffee and the cologne I'd bought him for Christmas, though I might be biased. "You're definitely biased," I laughed, leaning back against him, "but you're also right." Finnegan was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his tablet, teaching himself how to code something he called a Baptism Day Memory Keeper app. He'd been obsessed with technology since he turned 7, constantly taking apart old phones and computers to see how they worked. That morning, he looked up from his screen with those serious green eyes he'd inherited from my side of the family and said, "Mom, I programmed it to record everything important today. Every conversation, every moment. So Cordelia can watch it when she's older." "That's thoughtful, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of his head. His hair smelled like the strawberry shampoo he insisted wasn't too babyish for an 8-year-old. "But remember to also experience things without the screen, okay? Some memories are better when they're just in our hearts." He nodded solemnly, then added, "I also fixed your phone last night. The voice memo function was broken, but I got it working again. It'll automatically save any calls or messages now, even the weird ones from great-grandma." I should have paid more attention to that comment. I should have asked what he meant by weird ones. But I was distracted by Cordelia waking up, by the million small tasks that needed completing before we left for church. The bottles to prepare, the diaper bag to pack, the directions to text to out-of-town relatives. My father, Theodore, arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as he'd promised. He looked handsome in his navy suit, though I noticed new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas. "Your grandmother's having one of her difficult mornings," he said quietly while helping me load the car. "She called me at 4 a.m. insisting she needed to bring holy water from her personal collection. Said Father Morrison's wouldn't be strong enough." "Dad, maybe we shouldn't have insisted she come," I said, watching his face carefully. "If she's not feeling well mentally, this might be too much stimulation for her." He shook his head firmly. "She's my mother, Melinda." "Your grandmother. She'd never forgive us if we excluded her from her great-granddaughter's baptism. Besides, the doctor says these episodes are just anxiety. Being around family helps ground her." The drive to pick her up from Serenity Gardens Assisted Living took 40 minutes. When we arrived, Grandmother Beatrice was waiting in the lobby, dressed in her best purple suit, the one she'd worn to my wedding. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she'd applied her lipstick with the precision of a woman who'd spent 70 years perfecting her appearance. But her hands trembled as she clutched her Bible, and her eyes darted around like she was seeing things that weren't there. "There are too many birds today," she announced as we helped her into the car. "Birds are messengers, you know. They bring news from the other realm." "It's spring, Mom," my father said patiently. "Birds are always active in spring." She turned to look at Cordelia in her car seat, and her expression shifted to something I couldn't read. "She has his eyes," she whispered. Then louder. "Whose eyes does she have, Melinda?" "Garrett's mother's eyes," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Everyone says she looks just like Nadine's baby pictures." The church parking lot was already filling up when we arrived. My brother Donovan was there with his wife Priscilla, whom grandmother Beatrice had famously accused of witchcraft at their wedding 5 years ago because she'd worn a moonstone necklace. They kept their distance, nodding politely but not approaching. My best friend Waverly ran over to help with the diaper bag, her 3 kids trailing behind her like ducklings. "You look gorgeous, Mama," she said, squeezing my hand. "This is going to be perfect." Inside the church, the morning sun painted rainbows through the stained glass windows. The baptismal font had been decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Father Morrison was already in his ceremonial robes, smiling warmly as families filed into the pews. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined it would be. I had no idea that in less than an hour, those same roses would be scattered across the floor, knocked over when my grandmother made her violent proclamation about my baby being cursed. The ceremony began with such grace. Father Morrison's voice filled the sanctuary as he spoke about innocence and redemption, about how children come to us as blank pages waiting to be written with love and faith. Cordelia lay peaceful in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, completely unaware that her great-grandmother was sitting 3 rows back, muttering prayers under her breath, and clutching her Bible so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Do any here present know of any reason why this child should not be welcomed into God's family?" Father Morrison asked. It was a ceremonial question, one I'd heard at dozens of baptisms before. Nobody ever actually answered it. The sound of grandmother Beatrice standing up was like bones breaking. Her wooden pew creaked, and everyone turned to look. My heart dropped into my stomach as she raised her hand like a student in class. "I object!" Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades believing they spoke directly to God. "That child cannot be baptized in this holy place." Father Morrison blinked several times, as if trying to process what was happening. "Mrs. Beatrice, please, if you have concerns, we can discuss them after the ceremony." "There will be no ceremony." She pushed past my Aunt Delphine, who tried to grab her arm, and started marching toward the altar. "This is not a child of God. This is something else entirely." "Mother, sit down immediately," my father Theodore commanded, but his voice cracked, revealing his mortification. The entire congregation was frozen, watching this elderly woman in her purple suit advance on us like we were harboring some terrible secret. "I will not be silenced." She reached the front of the church and spun to face everyone. "You all need to know the truth. This baby was born under a blood moon. October 28th, 3:17 a.m. Look it up. The devil's own timing." "Lots of babies are born during lunar events," Garrett said, stepping slightly in front of me and Cordelia. "That doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell them about the ravens, Melinda. Tell them how they gather on your fence every morning since she was born. 20, 30 birds at a time, just watching your house." "We live near a park," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Birds gather everywhere in our neighborhood. And the crucifixes? Should we talk about those?" She was gaining momentum now, feeding off the shocked attention of the crowd. 3 crosses have fallen in their home. The one in the nursery crashed to the floor the night they brought her home from the hospital. The one in their hallway fell last month. And just last week, the Blessed Rosary I gave them for their wedding was found broken in pieces under the baby's crib. My mother-in-law, Nadine, stood up from her pew. "Beatrice, you're frightening people with these coincidences. Houses settle. Things fall. This is ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" Grandmother Beatrice pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I have photographs, documentation. I've been keeping records of every incident." She started scrolling frantically through her phone. The formula that curdled instantly when she touched the bottle, the way electronic devices malfunction around her, the neighbor's dog that won't stop howling when she's outside. "That dog howls at everything," I protested, feeling tears building behind my eyes. "Mrs. Patterson's beagle has anxiety. This is insane. And what about my Bible?" She held up her worn leather Bible, showing everyone a burn mark on the cover. This happened when they visited me last week. The moment that child entered my apartment, this holy book spontaneously combusted. If my aide hadn't thrown water on it, my entire room would have burned. It fell on your space heater, my father said, his face red with embarrassment and frustration. The nurse showed me the incident report. You had placed it on the heating unit and forgot. They're lying to you, Theodore. She turned on her own son. They're all lying because they don't want to face the truth about what's growing in that child. But I know. I've done my research into Garrett's family. His grandfather in Louisiana wasn't just some fisherman. He practiced things in those bayous. Dark things, voodoo, hoodoo, speaking with spirits. Garrett's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. My grandfather was a Baptist minister who also happened to fish for a living. You're creating fantasies. Am I? She looked triumphant now, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Then why did your cousin in Baton Rouge refuse to come today? Why did your Uncle Jerome warn people not to attend? They know what bloodline you carry. They know what you've passed to that innocent-looking child. The whispers started then, rippling through the congregation like wind through wheat. I heard fragments of speculation, people wondering if there was any truth to her claims, others discussing whether mental illness ran in our family. Someone in the back was already Googling Blood Moon October 28th on their phone. The church had descended into complete chaos. People were standing in their pews, some filming with their phones held high, others arguing among themselves about whether to stay or leave. My brother Donovan had pushed through the crowd and was now physically restraining my father from grabbing his own mother, whispering urgently in his ear that violence would only make things worse. My best friend Waverly had swooped in like a guardian angel, taking Cordelia from my trembling arms and retreating to the back of the church where her own children were huddled with their father. "This is a house of God," Father Morrison was saying, his usual calm completely shattered. "I must insist on order. Everyone, please sit down." But nobody was listening to him. The congregation had split into factions. Those who thought Grandmother Beatrice had lost her mind, those who were genuinely frightened by her accusations, and those who were simply here for the spectacle, recording every second for their social media feeds. That's when I noticed Finnegan. In all the mayhem, my 8-year-old son was standing perfectly still in the center aisle, his small figure like the eye of a hurricane. He wasn't crying or hiding like the other children. He was watching his great-grandmother with an expression I'd never seen on his young face before. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. He reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness, and I saw him pull out my phone. The same phone he'd fixed last night, the one he'd mentioned, had a working voice memo function again. My stomach tightened as I watched him check something on the screen, his fingers moving with the practiced ease of a child who'd grown up with technology. "Finnegan, honey, come here," I called out, but he didn't move. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he started walking toward Grandmother Beatrice. Each step was measured, confident, nothing like the shy boy who usually hid behind my legs when family drama erupted. The crowd began to notice him, and slowly, gradually, the noise died down as everyone watched this strange procession of a small boy approaching the family matriarch. "Finn, stay back," Garrett said, starting to move toward our son, but something in Finnegan's posture made him stop. When Finnegan reached his great-grandmother, he had to crane his neck to look up at her. She towered over him in her purple suit, still clutching her burned Bible, still radiating righteous fury. But something flickered in her eyes when she looked down at him. Was it fear? "Great-grandma," Finnegan said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent sanctuary, "should I play your midnight conversations?" The change in Beatrice's face was instantaneous. The color drained from her cheeks like water from a sink. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The Bible in her hands began to shake. "What are you talking about, child?" she finally managed, but her voice had lost all its power. It came out as barely more than a whisper. Finnegan held up my phone, the screen glowing in the church's dim lighting. Mom's phone saves all voice messages automatically now. I fixed it to do that because you call so much at night. You've been leaving messages, great grandma, lots of them. Not just for Mom, but you pocket dialed her a bunch of times while you were talking to other people. That's private, she stammered, reaching for the phone, but Finnegan took a step back, keeping it just out of her reach. Like the one from Tuesday, he continued, his young voice steady and clear. Tuesday at 2:47 a.m. You were talking to someone named Vincent. You were crying. You said something about a payment, about keeping a secret buried, about how the family was getting suspicious. The congregation had gone completely silent now. Even the babies had stopped fussing, as if they understood something momentous was happening. Father Morrison had moved closer, his hand half raised like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. Or the message from last month, Finnegan said, scrolling through the phone with one hand. March 15th, 1:33 a.m. You said, and I quote, "I had to tell them she's evil or they'll find out what I did. I had to create a distraction before anyone notices the missing money. $50,000 doesn't just disappear. If Theodore checks the accounts, if he sees what I gave to Vincent, everything I've built will be destroyed." The Bible slipped from Grandmother Beatrice's hands and hit the marble floor with a sound like thunder. Several people gasped. My father had gone rigid, his face pale as paper. "Finnegan, give me that phone," Grandmother Beatrice said, but now she was pleading, not demanding. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," my son said, and for a moment he sounded much older than 8. "You've been lying about my baby sister to cover up something you did. That's not very Christian, is it, Great-Grandma?" "Play it," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Finnegan, play the recording now." My son looked at me, then at his father, who nodded slowly. Garrett's face was stone, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working. Finnegan pressed play, and suddenly Grandmother Beatrice's voice filled the sanctuary. But it wasn't the commanding, righteous tone we'd been hearing. This voice was broken, desperate, dripping with fear. "Vincent, it's Beatrice. Please, you have to give me more time. The family is getting suspicious about the money. $50,000 doesn't just vanish. I've told them I donated it to the church renovation fund, but Father Morrison has no record of it. He's been asking questions. If they find out I gave it to you, if they learn about Theodore's real father, about the affair, about you being his half-brother, everything I've built will crumble." The recording continued, each word another nail in the coffin of Grandmother Beatrice's carefully constructed reputation. "I have a plan. The new baby, Cordelia, I'll convince them she's cursed, evil. It sounds insane, but they trust me as the religious authority in this family. If I make enough noise about the baby being demonic, they'll be too distracted to look into the missing money. I've already started dropping hints. I bought some ravens from that exotic pet store and released them near Melinda's house. I've been loosening the crosses on their walls when I visit. Small things, but enough to build a case." My legs nearly gave out. Garrett caught me, his arm strong around my waist, but his eyes never left Beatrice. The congregation was in uproar, people talking over each other, some calling her a monster, others asking if this was real. Father Morrison looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The recording wasn't finished. "I know it's cruel, Vincent. I know I'm destroying my relationship with my granddaughter, but what choice do I have? You'll expose everything if I don't pay. Theodore will learn that the man he called father for 58 years wasn't his biological father. He'll learn about my affair with Minister Coleman when I was his secretary. He'll learn about you, the baby I gave up before I married his father. The shame would kill me, Vincent, and it would destroy Theodore. He idolizes his father's memory." "Mother, stop the recording," my father Theodore said, but his voice was hollow, already defeated. He knew it was true. We could all see it in his eyes. But Finnegan didn't stop it. The recording continued. "The payment this month needs to be $20,000. I'll get it from the emergency fund Theodore set up for my medical care. He trusts me with the access codes. After the baptism, after I've convinced everyone the baby is evil, I'll suggest they need to focus on prayer and spiritual warfare instead of worldly concerns like money. Religious people never question financial irregularities when they think they're fighting Satan. The recording ended with a bitter laugh and the sound of pills rattling in a bottle. My anxiety medication, the only thing keeping me functional through this nightmare I created. 70 years of perfect Christian reputation, and now I'm being blackmailed by my own sin. God's sense of humor, I suppose. The silence that followed was deafening. Grandmother Beatrice had collapsed onto the front pew, her face in her hands. The purple suit that had looked so regal an hour ago now seemed like a costume on a broken doll. "Vincent Moreau," my brother Donovan said suddenly, holding up his phone. "I found him on Facebook. Look at his profile." He turned the screen toward my father. "Look at his face, Dad. Look at his eyes. Your eyes." My father took the phone with trembling hands. The resemblance was undeniable. Same strong jaw, same distinctive nose, same green eyes that Finnegan had inherited. "He's my brother." The words came out strangled. "Your half-brother," Beatrice whispered without looking up. "Born when I was 17, before I met your father. Minister Coleman was married. I was his secretary. When I got pregnant, my parents sent me away to have the baby. I gave him up for adoption and never spoke of it again. I thought that secret died when Coleman passed 15 years ago. But Vincent found me last year through one of those DNA testing sites. He had documentation, birth certificates, everything. He wanted money to keep quiet." "So you terrorized my family?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "You made me think something was wrong with my baby? You had people in this church crossing themselves when they looked at her?" "I panicked," she said, finally looking up. Her makeup had run, creating dark rivers down her cheeks. "I wasn't thinking clearly. The more I lied, the deeper I got. I even started believing some of it myself. The mind can play terrible tricks when you're desperate." "You bought birds," Garrett said flatly. "You actually went to a pet store and bought ravens to release near our house." "They were crows, actually. Ravens were too expensive." The admission was so absurd that someone in the back actually laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound that was quickly muffled. Father Morrison stepped forward, his aged hands trembling slightly as he surveyed the wreckage of what should have been a sacred ceremony. "Beatrice, I think it's time for you to leave. This family has much to discuss, but not here. Not now. Today we're here to celebrate new life, not unearth old sins." My Uncle Donovan, who hadn't spoken to Grandmother Beatrice in 5 years after she'd accused his wife of witchcraft, was the first to move. He walked over to where she sat crumpled in the pew and gently touched her shoulder. "Come on, Grandma, I'll drive you home." She looked up at him with confused eyes. "But you hate me. I ruined your wedding." "I don't hate you," he said quietly. "I feel sorry for you. Living with that much fear and shame for 70 years must have been its own kind of hell. Let's go." As they left, Grandmother Beatrice turned back one last time. "Melinda, I'm sorry. The baby, Cordelia, she's perfect. She's beautiful. I'm the one who's cursed, not her." The church slowly emptied until only our immediate family and closest friends remained. Father Morrison, bless him, offered to continue with the baptism. "Evil has been exposed and expelled from this space," he said gently. "Now seems the perfect time to welcome innocence and truth." So we did. With only 20 people instead of 200, we baptized Cordelia. Father Morrison's hands shook slightly as he poured the holy water, but his words rang with extra meaning. "May this child know truth, practice mercy, and never let fear disguise itself as faith." That night, after everyone had gone home and Cordelia was sleeping peacefully in her crib, I found Finnegan in his room, organizing the recordings on my phone into a folder he'd labeled Evidence of Truth. "How long have you known?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Since last month," he admitted. "I heard one of her middle-of-the-night messages by accident when I was fixing your phone. I started saving them all after that. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." "You shouldn't have had to carry that burden, sweetheart. You're only 8. He looked at me with those serious green eyes, so much like his grandfather's, like his newly discovered great-uncle's. "Someone had to protect Cordelia. She can't protect herself yet." The next few months were complicated. My father, Theodore, struggled with learning that the man he'd grieved for 10 years wasn't his biological father. He started therapy, something I never thought I'd see him do. He even reached out to Vincent, his half-brother, not with anger, but with curiosity. They've met twice now for coffee. Vincent, it turns out, isn't a monster, just a man who'd spent his whole life wondering why he was given away. He's actually returned most of the money, keeping only what he'd spent on the private investigator who'd helped him find his birth mother. Grandmother Beatrice moved to a different assisted living facility, one with better psychiatric support. The evaluation revealed she'd been suffering from severe anxiety and paranoid delusions, exacerbated by the stress of being blackmailed. She's on proper medication now, and the last letter she sent included a check for the remaining money she'd taken. I donated it to the church's fund for struggling families, turning her deception into someone else's hope. The video of the baptism did go viral briefly. Baby's baptism becomes family exorcism, got 2 million views before we had it taken down. We didn't press charges against Grandmother Beatrice, though we could have. Some sins punish themselves through exposure. She lost what she valued most, her reputation as the family's moral compass, the respect of her church community, and the trust of her family. 6 months later, at Cordelia's first birthday party, I watched my daughter take her first steps. She toddled straight toward Finnegan, who caught her with gentle hands, and I realized that he'd been protecting her from the very beginning, not from demons or curses, but from the very human tendency to hurt others to hide our own pain. The Bible. Grandmother Beatrice, dropped that day, still sits in Father Morrison's office. He keeps it as a reminder, he says, that Scripture becomes dangerous when wielded as a weapon instead of embraced as wisdom. Sometimes the greatest evil isn't supernatural at all. It's just ordinary people so afraid of their own humanity that they'll destroy anyone to keep their secrets buried. Our family is different now, more honest, maybe even stronger. We learned that real faith isn't about perfection or reputation. It's about having the courage to face the truth, even when that truth is uglier than any lie we could tell. And sometimes, the greatest blessing comes from an 8-year-old boy, brave enough to stand up and say, "This is wrong," when all the adults are too afraid to speak. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about a time when truth came from an unexpected source in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about families finding light in their darkest moments.